It is 2 in the morning in Caroline County, Virginia. A flashlight hits the bedroom wall and the sheriff is standing over a young couple asleep in their bed. He asks the man what he is doing with this woman. She holds up her hand and says she is his wife. The sheriff looks at the marriage certificate hanging on the wall, looks back at the two of them and says, "Not here you are not." What nobody knew at the time was that this moment, this couple pulled from their own bed in the middle of the night, would end up dismantling marriage laws across the entire country. That couple was Richard and Mildred Loving, and in 1958, in the state of Virginia, their marriage was a felony. It was 1950, and in the rural farmland of Central Point, Virginia, a white boy named Richard Loving and a girl named Mildred Jeter were growing up as neighbors. Central Point was a strange pocket of the American South. Unlike most communities across Virginia, the families here had mixed for generations. Black families, white families, and Native American families lived side by side, attended each other's cookouts, and their children played together in the same fields. Richard's father worked alongside black men at a local construction site. It was not unusual. Nobody commented on it. Mildred's family, the Jeters, were part of the Rappahannock tribe with African American ancestry. In Central Point, that was just who they were, and nobody thought much of it. The color lines that carved up the rest of Virginia blurred here into something more human. Richard was quiet and broad-shouldered. He liked cars, he liked drag racing on the weekends, he liked building things with his hands, and he liked Mildred. She was 11 years old when they started spending time together. He was 17. She was shy and soft-spoken, the kind of person who listened more than she talked. By the time she was a teenager, they were a couple. And in a place like Central Point, where people had been crossing racial lines for as long as anyone could remember, that did not raise alarms. Their families knew, their neighbors knew. This was just how things were in their small corner of the world. But Central Point was not the world. And the laws that governed Virginia did not care about the customs of one small farming community. Outside that bubble, the 1950s were suffocating for interracial couples. Imagine waking up every morning next to someone you loved and knowing that in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of your neighbors, in the eyes of most of the country, you were committing a crime just by being together. A Gallup poll from 1958 found that only 4% of Americans approved of marriage between black and white people. 4%. That meant 96 out of every 100 people surveyed believed it was wrong. And this was not just a Southern attitude. White families in the North held the same views. A study from Washington University found that white families most often refused to have anything to do with children who entered interracial marriages. They did not just disapprove, they disowned their own sons and daughters, cut them out of the family completely. The hostility was not limited to private family conversations. It followed couples out the front door and into every single part of their day. Think about what a normal morning looked like for an interracial wife in the 1950s. You wake up next to the person you love. You get dressed. You step outside. And from that moment forward, you are performing a criminal act in the eyes of the law. You cannot eat breakfast together at the diner down the street because the owner will not seat you at the same table. You cannot shop for groceries side by side without drawing stares and whispers from every aisle. If your car breaks down on the highway and a police officer pulls over to help, you cannot explain why a white man and a black woman are traveling together without risking questions that lead to an arrest. Your daily life is a minefield. Every interaction with the outside world carries the potential for confrontation, violence, or jail. Journalist Soledad O'Brien later described her own parents' experience. Her mother was Afro-Cuban, her father was Irish-Australian, and they married in Washington, D.C. in 1959. Because interracial marriage was illegal in Maryland where they lived. Her mother told her that strangers would spit on them as they walked down the street with their children. Restaurants would not serve them. Neighbors made it clear they were not welcome. And that was in a border state, not the Deep South. Psychiatrists in the 50s had their own explanation for why a white person would marry someone of another race. They did not see it as love. They called it a neurotic symptom. A researcher named Joseph Golden published a paper in the American Sociological Review in 1954 studying interracial couples and noted that these couples mostly had to frequent places of entertainment in black neighborhoods because white establishments would refuse them service. The medical establishment was not defending these couples. It was diagnosing them. If you were a white person who fell in love across the color line, the scientific consensus of the day said there was something psychologically wrong with you. And if you are wondering how that was even legal, so is everyone else who hears about it for the first time. Then there were the laws themselves. By the middle of the 20th century, 30 American states had anti-miscegenation statutes on the books. Some of these went back centuries. Maryland passed the first one in 1691. Virginia followed with its own restrictions shortly after. These were not dusty relics that nobody enforced. They carried real criminal penalties: fines, imprisonment, forced annulment of marriages. In some states, a couple could face up to 10 years in prison simply for being married to each other. And in Virginia specifically, the legislature had gone further than most. In 1924, Virginia passed the Racial Integrity Act. This law was not born from tradition or custom. It came directly from the eugenics movement, the pseudo-scientific belief that white racial purity had to be preserved through selective breeding. A man named Walter Plecker, Virginia's state registrar of vital statistics, had pushed hard for the law. Plecker was a white supremacist who believed that mixing races would produce defective children. He wrote that two races as different as white and black could not live in close contact without injury to the higher race. Under his law, every person born in Virginia was classified on their birth certificate as either white or colored, and white meant having no trace whatsoever of non-white ancestry. One drop of black blood, as the rule was commonly known, made you colored in the eyes of the state. Marriage between the two categories was a felony punishable by prison time. Plecker did not just write the law, he enforced it far beyond his official role. He pressured school superintendents to kick mixed-race children out of white schools. He ordered the bodies of people with what he called questionable ancestry to be dug up from white cemeteries and reburied somewhere else. He went through birth records and reclassified Virginia's Native Americans as colored, convinced that most of them had African ancestry and were trying to pass. The Racial Integrity Act was not an outlier. It was part of a wave. Virginia also passed the Public Assemblages Act in 1926, which required racial segregation at all public meetings. And in 1930, another statute formally codified the one-drop rule into law. These were not hidden policies. They were publicly celebrated by groups like the Anglo-Saxon Clubs of America, who argued openly that mixing the races would cause the downfall of civilization. This was the legal reality surrounding Richard and Mildred when they fell in love. And this is the part that makes the whole thing feel unreal. Inside Central Point, their relationship was ordinary. Outside it, their love was classified the same as robbery or assault. Now, here is the thing that makes the Loving story different from an abstract legal case. These were not wealthy people with political connections. Richard was a bricklayer and construction worker. Mildred was a quiet young woman who liked being close to her family. They did not have lawyers on retainer. They did not have a plan. They were two people from the same tiny community who had known each other since childhood, and they wanted to spend their lives together. By 1958, Mildred was 18 and pregnant with their first child. Richard wanted to do the right thing. He wanted to marry her. They both knew it could not happen in Virginia. So, on June 2nd, 1958, they drove north to Washington, D.C., where interracial marriage was legal, and they got their license. They stood before an official, said their vows, and became husband and wife. Then they drove home to Central Point and hung their marriage certificate on the bedroom wall of Mildred's parents' house, where they were living at the time. For 5 weeks, they lived as newlyweds. They were settling into what they hoped would be a quiet life together, getting ready for their baby. They were not activists. They were not making a political statement. They were a young couple who wanted to start their family in the place they had always known. Mildred later told reporters she did not even realize their marriage was illegal in Virginia. She thought the license from Washington made it valid everywhere. Then on July 11th, at 2 in the morning, Sheriff Garnett Brooks and 2 deputies kicked through the door. Someone had tipped them off. An anonymous caller had told the sheriff that a white man and a colored woman were living together as husband and wife in Caroline County. The sheriff shone his flashlight on Richard and Mildred, lying in bed together. Richard pointed to the marriage certificate on the wall. The sheriff told him that piece of paper was worth nothing in Virginia. Both of them were arrested and taken to the county jail in the nearby town of Bowling Green. Richard posted a $1,000 bond and was released after one night. His sister put up the money. Mildred was not given the same option. She spent several nights locked up in a cell. Later, she told an interviewer about a moment in that jail that terrified her. A sheriff brought a male inmate back from an outside work detail and said, loud enough for Mildred to hear, that he should let the man go into her cell for the night. Whether or not he was serious, the threat hung in the air of that small county jail. I mean, think about that for a second. A pregnant woman, locked in a cell because she got married. In October of 1958, a grand jury in Caroline County indicted them both for violating Virginia law. On January 6, 1959, Richard and Mildred appeared before Judge Leon Bazile in the circuit court. They pleaded guilty. There was no denying what they had done. They were, in fact, married. Judge Bazile sentenced each of them to 1 year in prison but suspended the sentence on one condition. They had to leave Virginia and not return together for 25 years. 25 years of exile. That was the price of their marriage. Banishment from the state where they were born, where their parents lived, where their entire world existed, and the conditions were strict. They could visit family members separately, but they could never be in Virginia at the same time. If they were caught together inside state lines, both of them would be arrested and sent to prison to serve the full year. The judge offered his own reasoning for the sentence, by the way. He wrote that the fact that God separated the races showed he did not intend for them to mix. A sitting judge used theology as constitutional law. The Lovings packed up their lives and moved to Washington, D.C. For a while, things actually seemed fine. Washington was a city where their marriage was legal. They could walk down the street together without breaking the law. They had their children. Donald was born, then Peggy. From the outside, it looked like they had found a way to adapt. That did not last. Richard was a country boy down to his bones. He worked construction. He liked fixing cars. He liked being outside where the air was clean and the sky was wide open. Washington felt nothing like home. The crowded city blocks, the noise, the concrete, everywhere he looked. Mildred missed her mother. She missed the fields and the open spaces and the feeling of belonging to a place. Their son Donald was hit by a car on a busy street, and while he was not seriously hurt, it shook both of them. This city was not built for the kind of life they wanted, and even in Washington, life was hard. Interracial couples in the early 60s still drew stares, insults, and worse. The legal right to marry did not translate into social acceptance. Strangers crossed the street to avoid them. Landlords found excuses not to rent to them. The weight of it all pressed down every day, and underneath it was the constant reminder that their home, the only place where they could truly breathe, was off limits to them as a couple. Every holiday was a negotiation. Christmas with family meant driving to Virginia separately, making sure they were never in the state at the same time. If one of their parents got sick, they could not both be at the bedside. The terms of their exile turned every family gathering into a logistics problem, every visit home into a risk calculation. One mistake, one report from a neighbor, and they would both go to prison for a year. This decision to keep fighting seemed small at the time. It was not. In 1963, the civil rights movement was gaining momentum across the country. The March on Washington was making headlines. Martin Luther King Jr. was speaking to hundreds of thousands of people about justice and equality. Mildred was watching all of this unfold, and at the suggestion of a cousin, she decided to do something. She sat down and wrote a letter, by hand, to the Attorney General of the United States, Robert Kennedy. The letter was simple and direct. She explained her situation and asked if there was anything the government could do to help her and Richard live in their home state. Kennedy could not directly intervene in a state criminal matter, but his office forwarded the letter to the American Civil Liberties Union. The ACLU assigned the case to a young attorney named Bernard Cohen, who was working out of a small practice in Alexandria, Virginia. Cohen filed the initial petition in November of 1963, asking the court to vacate the Lovings conviction. A few months later, a chance meeting connected him with another young lawyer, Philip Hirschkopf, who had been doing civil rights work down in Mississippi. Together, these two men, both barely out of law school, took on the state of Virginia. And somehow, it gets worse. The motion to overturn the conviction sat with Judge Basile, the same judge who had sentenced the Lovings years earlier. For over a year, nothing happened. Then, on January 22, 1965, Basile finally issued his response. He refused to vacate the conviction, and in his written ruling, he included what became one of the most infamous passages in the history of American law. He wrote that God created the races, white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and placed them on separate continents, and that the interference with this arrangement was the only reason such marriages existed. He concluded that God separating the races showed he did not intend for them to mix. A judge, in 1965, in the middle of the civil rights era, while the country was debating voting rights and desegregation, used biblical reasoning to keep a husband and wife apart. That was the state of the law. That was what passed for legal analysis. Cohen and Hirschkopf appealed to the Supreme Court of Appeals of Virginia. That court upheld the conviction. In its decision, the state court invoked the idea of preserving racial integrity and preventing what it called the corruption of blood. The language sounded like it belonged in the 1800s, and in many ways, it did. These laws trace their logic back to the same slave codes that had governed the colonies before America was even a country. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything that followed. The Virginia court's ruling meant there was only one place left to go: the United States Supreme Court. Cohen and Hirschkopf filed their appeal, and on April 10, 1967, they stood before the 9 justices of the highest court in the country and argued that Virginia's law violated the Constitution. Richard and Mildred Loving did not attend the hearing. They were not comfortable in the spotlight and never had been. Richard sent a message through his attorneys to the justices, just 5 words: "Tell the court I love my wife." On June 12, 1967, the Supreme Court of the United States issued its decision. It was unanimous. All 9 justices agreed. Virginia's ban on interracial marriage violated the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote the opinion, stating that the freedom to marry has long been recognized as one of the vital personal rights essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness. He said that restricting this freedom solely because of racial classifications was to deprive citizens of liberty without due process of law. The court also found that Virginia's law did not criminalize marriage between members of 2 non-white races, only marriage involving a white person, which proved the law's real purpose was upholding white supremacy. The ruling did not just overturn the Lovings conviction. It struck down anti-miscegenation laws in 16 states across the South and border regions that still enforced them. From Virginia to Georgia to Texas to the Carolinas, laws that had stood for generations were wiped out in a single afternoon. Couples who had been hiding their relationships, living in fear, or crossing state lines just to marry, suddenly had the full protection of the Constitution behind them. The first recorded interracial marriage in Virginia after the ruling took place on August 13, 1967. A white woman named Leona Boyd married a black man named Roman Johnson at a church in Norfolk just 2 months after the decision came down. Think about that. For the first time in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia, going back to 1691, when the colony passed its original restriction, a couple of different races could stand in a church, say their vows, sign a license, and walk out as husband and wife without fearing arrest. But not every state accepted the ruling willingly. Some southern jurisdictions dragged their feet, local clerks quietly refused to issue licenses. Couples in rural parts of the Deep South reported that officials would suddenly find paperwork problems or scheduling conflicts when an interracial couple came in to file for a marriage license. The Supreme Court had spoken, but changing the law on paper and changing it in practice were two very different things. The Lovings finally went home. After 9 years of exile, they crossed the county line into Caroline County together for the first time as a legal married couple. Richard built a small cinder-block house for Mildred with his own hands on a piece of land not far from where they had both grown up. They raised their 3 children. They did not give speeches. They did not go on television. They did not write memoirs. When reporters called, Mildred usually said no. She told the Associated Press in 1992 that they never wanted to be heroes. She said, "What happened? We really did not intend for it to happen. What we wanted to come home." On June 29, 1975, just 8 years after the Supreme Court gave them the right to live together in Virginia, a drunk driver ran through an intersection and slammed into the car Richard was driving. Richard was killed instantly. He was 41 years old. Mildred was sitting beside him. She survived the crash, but lost the sight in her right eye. After fighting through 9 years of exile, surviving threats and humiliation, and winning a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, Richard Loving died on a rural road in the same county where he had been arrested for the crime of loving his wife. Mildred never remarried. She raised their children alone in the house Richard had built. She kept mostly to herself, turning down interview requests, declining invitations to events held in her honor. When people asked her about the case, she kept things short. She once said, "It was not my doing, it was God's work." But in 2007, on the 40th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision, Mildred released a written statement she called "Loving for All." In it, she said she had lived long enough to see big changes. She said the older generation's fears and prejudices had given way. And then she said something that surprised a lot of people. She said she believed all Americans, regardless of race, sex, or sexual orientation, should have the same freedom to marry. She wrote that government had no business imposing some people's religious beliefs over others. Mildred Loving died of pneumonia on May 2, 2008, at her home in rural Virginia. She was 68 years old. Her daughter, Peggy, told reporters she wanted people to remember her mother as someone who was strong and brave, yet humble, and who believed in love. When the Lovings married in 1958, only 4% of Americans approved of interracial marriage. By 2021, Gallup measured that number at 94%. That is one of the largest shifts in public opinion ever recorded in the history of American polling. From near-universal opposition to near-universal acceptance inside a single lifetime. But not everything changed quickly. Alabama was the last state to officially scrub anti-miscegenation language from its state constitution. That did not happen until the year 2000. 33 years after the Supreme Court had already declared those laws unconstitutional. And even then, when the vote went to Alabama voters, 40% of them voted to keep the language in. June 12th is now celebrated annually as Loving Day across the United States. The Lovings case was cited by the Supreme Court again in 2015 in the decision that legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. The legal foundation that Richard and Mildred built, without ever intending to, extended far beyond the issue of race. Mildred Loving never wanted to be a symbol. She wanted to be a wife, living with her husband in the place where they both grew up. She wanted to sit on the porch Richard built and watch her children play in the yard. She wanted to be close to her mother. Sometimes the people who change everything are the ones who never set out to change anything at all. They just refused to accept that their life together was a crime. If this story moved you, hit subscribe so you do not miss what we cover next. Drop a like and leave a comment telling us what part of the Loving story hit you the hardest.